had spent 3 years living in Dublin after uprooting my life from Ontario, Canada. Little did I know that my quiet passion for fly fishing would lure me into a competition that led to a harrowing experience. It all started with a seemingly innocent premise: spend over €70 at my local fishing tackle shop, and I could enter my email into a draw for an enticing prize. The reward? An all-expenses-paid fishing trip to the Roundstone Bog Lakes, an eerie, windswept expanse of wilderness on Ireland's remote western coast. The setting was nothing short of breathtaking, a hauntingly beautiful landscape dotted with dozens of glacial lakes, spread across a rugged 25-square-mile expanse on Ireland's remote western coast. Yet, beneath its tranquil facade, it seemed to harbor untold secrets. When the email from my tackle shop landed in my inbox, congratulating me on winning the grand prize, I could hardly believe my luck. In hindsight, perhaps I should have. I immediately set about arranging everything for the trip, filing for leave at work, booking a pet hotel for my dogs, and returning to the tackle shop to splurge on even more gear. The itinerary included a stay at a luxurious lodge on the outskirts of Roundstone, a place that seemed even more impressive the more I researched it. My excitement and anticipation grew with each passing day, but so did a faint, gnawing unease. There was something unsettling about the trip, as though I were being pulled into something far darker than a simple fishing getaway. Perhaps it was the unfamiliarity of it all. I had hardly ventured beyond Dublin during my time in Ireland, and back in Ontario, my fishing adventures were confined to urban settings. I had never cast a line in truly untamed wilderness before. Still, I could hardly wait for the departure date, though it lingered 2 weeks away. Little did I know, those tranquil, secluded lakes were waiting to deliver a terror I could never have imagined. When my departure date arrived, I had already checked my dogs into the pet hotel and officially started my leave. I packed all my new fishing gear into the car, set my destination into the navigation system, and departed from Dublin that morning. The drive to Roundstone would take roughly 3.5 hours, and I aimed to arrive just after check-in opened. As the urban surroundings slowly gave way to a picturesque countryside landscape, my excitement was yet again plagued by a vague sense of unease. The winding roads, flanked by dense, ancient woods and shadowed by ominous clouds, seemed to hint at a very old region of the country. The air grew colder as the weather continued to turn. I reassured myself that there was nothing wrong with being a bit nervous. I was, after all, venturing into an area unknown to me in a country I was still getting to know. Yet, the further I drove, the stronger the feeling of unease grew, as if the very land itself harbored an old, hidden secret. The sun's light began to wane with the dark clouds building, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape as raindrops started to fall on the car's windshield. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, winding deeper into a hauntingly beautiful but undeniably sinister wilderness. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed forward, determined to reach my destination but perplexed by the inexplicable feeling that something malevolent awaited me in the shadows. I attempted to distract myself by formulating a fishing plan for the next couple of days. I needed to determine what lakes I wanted to fish first, how long my collective hiking time would be for a round trip back to the lodge, and what fly patterns I should try. The tactic worked, and after a while, I began to relax, enjoying the soothing rhythm of the road beneath my tires. As I approached the small village of Roundstone, the scene transformed into a mixture of surreal beauty and formidable intimidation. Acres upon acres of purple moor grass interspersed with jagged granite outcroppings and glacial lakes stretched from the rugged coastline to the 12 Bends mountain range. The landscape seemed almost otherworldly, a hauntingly beautiful expanse that was enveloped in rolling mist and rain. This was true wild country, a place where nature reigns supreme. Untamed terrain like this should never be underestimated, irrespective of its beauty. I finally arrived at the lodge, a striking edifice that blended a brick foundation with an intricately crafted wooden upper construction. It stood proudly in the wilderness, resembling an old cabin that had been enchanted into a sprawling mansion. The intermittent sun cast long shadows across its facade, giving it an almost otherworldly glow through the mist and the rain. I parked my car and made my way to the reception to check myself in. The interior was dimly lit and it was sparsely but tastefully decorated. An old lady sat behind the desk. She introduced herself as the owner, but curiously, offered no name. After exchanging very brief pleasantries, I collected my luggage from the car and proceeded to my room. The room was plush, stunning, and luxurious beyond my wildest dreams. The rich scent of the wooden walls, floor, and ceiling was both pleasant and intoxicating, enveloping me in a sense of warmth and comfort. The furniture was adorned with intricate carvings, and the bed was draped in expensive linen, inviting me to sink into its embrace. I couldn't stop smiling. This was such an amazing prize to win. Yet, amidst the luxury, I couldn't shake the irrational nervousness and foreboding that had accompanied me on my journey. The silence of the lodge was almost deafening, interrupted only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant howl of the wind. Determined to enjoy my stay, I pushed aside the uneasy thoughts and focused on the comfort of my surroundings. After I had settled into my room and taken a shower, I decided to go downstairs and locate the bar. The lodge bar was just as pleasing to the eye as the lodge itself, with minimal yet tasteful decorations and bar paraphernalia that had an old-world charm. I ordered a pint from the barman and settled into a deep and comfortable chair opposite the crackling fire, its warm flames a stark contrast to the misty and rainy conditions outside. I finished my beer and ordered another, making small talk with the barman, who was pleasant and informative regarding certain lakes I should try, pointing them out on a large map that was framed behind the bar. After a while, I headed to the dining area. The dining area was equally luxurious yet carried an air of melancholy. I had a delicious ribeye steak for dinner, but the silence of the room was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of the wind howling outside. I decided to head to bed as it was getting late, and I needed to be well rested for the hiking I had planned the following day. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, fully rested after a fantastic sleep in the opulent bed. I had requested a continental breakfast be set out for me, knowing that I would leave the lodge before the kitchen was open for breakfast. I finished my meal, accompanied by a mug of coffee from the flask that had been thoughtfully provided. The lodge was eerily silent in the pre-dawn hours, and the sense of isolation was palpable. I gathered my backpack, my collapsible fly fishing rod, and my landing net, which I clipped to my backpack. My reel was inside the backpack, along with 2 boxes containing different fly patterns, water bottles, a GPS, my phone, and some snacks. The weather had cleared somewhat, with broken clouds and an early morning mist hugging the expanse of Roundstone Bog. The rain had finally ceased, and the crisp, cool air was refreshing against my skin. The barman had helpfully pointed out a couple of the glacial lakes that I should try first. However, in an attempt to finally eradicate my nervousness and sense of foreboding about hiking into the wild landscape, I decided to try a lake located further into the bog, in the direction of the western coastline. This was a form of overcompensation on my behalf, and I was subconsciously aware of this. Nevertheless, I had formulated a fishing plan for the day, and I was determined to execute it. Armed with my GPS and a handheld map of the immediate area and its lakes, a map that was made available to me upon check-in, I began my hike towards the chosen lake. The hike would take me around 3 hours, hopefully placing me at a favorable fishing spot by mid-morning. As I ventured deeper into the bog, the morning mist began to lift, revealing a dazzling expanse of rugged moorland. The landscape was hauntingly beautiful, with the vibrant purple moor grass swaying gently in the breeze and the granite outcroppings standing like silent sentinels. The eerie stillness was broken only by the occasional cry of a bird or the rustle of the grass. I could hear and occasionally spot different birds foraging among the moor grass and along the shores of a couple of lakes that I hiked past. The sense of isolation was profound, and with each step, the world I had left behind seemed to fade further into the distance. My anticipation rose as I hoped to spot more wildlife, one of the major perks of being a fisherman that I truly enjoyed. Yet, the deeper I ventured, the more the wild landscape seemed to close in around me. The air grew colder, and the wind picked up slightly, now tugging at the moor grass. The sense of foreboding that had plagued me earlier returned, stronger than ever, as if the land itself was whispering warnings along the wind. Despite my unease, I pressed on, determined to reach the lake I had chosen. The rugged beauty of the moorland held a dark allure, drawing me deeper into its mysterious embrace. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape, I was making good time and already deep into the bog. I made it to the lake earlier than I expected. The mist hung low over the water, lending an eerie tranquility to the scene. I studied the water surface intently, choosing a specific fly pattern I hoped would tempt a lurking trout. The wind seemed to bluster around me, a constant, frustrating companion that made casting a fly line a challenge. Nevertheless, I managed and began working a section of water just off the southern bank. After an hour of fruitless effort, I decided to move up the shoreline, seeking shelter in a half-bay, its waters calmer and more inviting. On my third cast, my fly vanished from the surface, an expanding ripple the only evidence of its previous location. Excitement surged through me as I stripped my fly line, feeling the thrilling resistance of a fish on the other end. Success! After the solid strike, I quickly wound the stripped fly line onto my reel as fast as I could and started the fight. The fish pulled with a strength that was impressive, its struggle sending vibrations through the rod. After a pleasing yet intense battle, I netted a decent-sized brown trout. Its golden scales shimmered in the dim light, a beautiful creature that was gifted by this gorgeous glacial lake. I took a quick photo with my phone, admiring the trout's vibrant colors in the morning light, before releasing it back into the lake. I was really happy and smiled broadly. Yet, even as I took a deep breath of the crisp air and appreciated the striking surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that the land held its breath, waiting for something. The shadows seemed to deepen around me, and the stillness of the lake took on a menacing quality. I forced myself to overcome the unease I felt and decided to hike to another lake a few miles further towards the western coastline. It meant I would probably only make it back to the lodge by late afternoon if I factored in another hour of fishing. Undeterred, I set off, walking along a narrow path that wove through the moor grass. The wind had died down completely, which suited me perfectly. The hike was pleasant and did not seem to take long, even though it was a good distance through the bog. As I reached a slight rise, my target came into view, a picturesque glacial lake framed by grass and granite rocks. I admired the view for a moment, the serenity of the scene contradicting the growing tension I felt. Before setting off again, I noticed something to my right. A medium stream ran down toward the lake I was heading to, its banks completely covered with moor grass except for one area, the area I was looking at. There was a break in the grass and an exposed, brown, muddy patch that looked like something had used it as a slide to enter the stream. It was possibly made by an animal of some kind, and a sizable animal at that. Curiosity piqued, I approached the area for a closer inspection, only to be hit by a wall of odor that punched me in the face. If you've ever been to the penguin or sea lion enclosures at a zoo, you'll know the odor I'm referring to, an overpowering fishy smell so strong it was almost acrid. For some reason, my unease leapt into my chest and clenched at my throat. What animal had made the slide? Did an animal actually make the slide? Why was there such an overwhelming stench of fish in the air? I considered turning back. I had already successfully landed a trout for the day, and I still had 2 days of my prize vacation left. I could head back now, enjoy a nice whiskey in the bar next to the fireplace, and post my trout photo on Facebook. This could be deemed a successful and amazing day by any fisherman's standards. Yet, I stood there, staring at that slide on the bank for a long time, my mind racing with questions and apprehension. The urge to leave passed somewhat and I physically shook myself before starting to walk toward the lake. When I reached the nearest shore, I could identify 3 different spots right away that could be holding some trout. This lake looked very promising indeed. I began to cast my fly line, working the water along the bank, but the feeling of being watched encroached on my concentration. The silence of the surrounding wilderness grew oppressive, and then I spotted something. On the eastern side of the lake, where the medium stream I encountered flowed into it, something came bounding up the stream. It was dark in color and moved swiftly, its light form cutting through the shallow water with eerie grace. I recognized the bounce and the style of movement as that of an animal I knew from somewhere. As the creature drew closer, its bounds and leaps heading directly towards me, my mind recognized the manner in which the animal moved. It was an otter. For a brief moment, my heart leapt with glee as I watched the approaching otter. I had always wanted to see an otter in the wild. This sighting could be the absolute icing on the cake as far as my fishing trip was concerned. As I reached for my phone to capture the otter on camera, I noticed that something was not quite right. Something was off. The otter seemed to be large. My initial glee left me. As a matter of fact, as the animal came bounding and leaping ever closer to me, sending water splashes flying from scattered puddles along the stretch of moorland between us, it became apparent that the animal was very large. Huge, even. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my heart started hammering in my chest. I was looking at an impossible otter. Panic surged through me as the monstrous otter closed the distance between us. I backed away, stumbling over the uneven ground, my mind racing with terror. What had I stumbled upon in this desolate wilderness? My phone slipped from my trembling fingers, forgotten in the face of the impending threat. The otter stopped just a few feet away, its eyes locked onto mine with a predatory intensity. That overpowering fishy stench I encountered at the mudslide filled the air. Its massive form, the great sleek head and the obvious muscular build underneath the thick pelt was an image that my brain was protesting against. What I was seeing could not be real. It seemed to relish my fear, and it began emitting an excited high-pitched chittering which echoed through the silent and empty landscape. The chittering revealed powerful jaws with big, deadly-looking bone-white teeth. The sound was a typical otter vocalization that I had heard before on TV. However, hearing a chittering sound, typically considered cute and endearing, coming from such a massive and formidable creature was utterly surreal. I knew I had to do something, anything, to escape this nightmarish creature. Summoning all my courage, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. The path ahead blurred as I sprinted, the image of the impossible otter burned into my mind. As I was running as fast as I possibly could, the inevitable happened, I fell, hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, I lay there, gasping for breath. Panic surged through me as I spun around on the ground, eyes wide with terror. The great otter, jaws wide open, was lunging towards me with a ferocity that defied belief. Instinctively, I put up my right leg and attempted to kick at the otter. It latched onto my Wellington boot with a vice-like grip, shaking its head violently. The sheer force of the attack caused my boot to be pierced by its teeth, and I felt a searing pain as my foot was ripped and shredded. I cried out in agony, desperation fueling my every move as I kicked with my other leg, but the massive otter showed no reaction. It continued shaking its head, its grip unwavering, with my right boot and foot still in its mouth. The sensation was unbearable, my foot was being torn apart, each movement sending waves of excruciating pain through my body. Suddenly, by a stroke of luck, my foot pulled free of the boot locked in the great jaws. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I scrambled backwards on my buttocks, my hands sinking into the grass and mud, and my feet pushing against the ground in a frantic attempt to put distance between myself and the monster. The otter stood there, my Wellington boot clenched in its jaws, staring at me with those cold, intelligent eyes. It seemed almost disappointed, as if it had expected more of a fight. The pain in my foot was blinding. I knew I had to keep moving, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible, but my body was betraying me, exhaustion and fear sapping my strength. With a final, defiant burst of energy, I pushed myself to my feet, hobbling away from the otter as fast as my injured foot would allow. The landscape around me blurred into a haze of green and brown, the shadows of the moorland closing in like grasping hands. Every step was a battle, my heart pounding in my chest, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the otter watching me, its eyes gleaming with a predatory cunning that sent chills down my spine. I could sense that I was not going to make my escape as I noticed the enormous otter tensing, readying itself for a pouncing leap into another attack. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. At that moment, my phone, which I had dropped further down the path, emitted an alarm ringtone, set to remind me to touch base with the pet hotel and check up on my dogs. The otter jolted with fright at the sharp ringtone, its volume amplified by the utter silence of the empty landscape. It looked confused and uncertain how to proceed, its predatory gaze momentarily broken. It dropped the boot. The ringtone continued, shrill and piercing, echoing through the desolate moorland. The massive otter sneezed in an almost irritable fashion, and in one fast, smooth motion, it slinked back down the path toward the stream. Just like that, it was gone, leaving behind only a lingering hint of that repulsive and overpowering fish odor. I lay there, panting and trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The pain in my foot was excruciating. The reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. I was alone, injured, and miles away from any semblance of safety. The land around me, once a picturesque wilderness, now felt like a malevolent entity, conspiring to keep me trapped within its grasp. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to stand, wincing as the pain shot through my injured foot. I needed to get back to the lodge, to find help, but the journey ahead seemed impossibly long and fraught with danger. With a deep breath, I began to hobble back along the path, each step a painful reminder of the encounter with the monstrous otter. The landscape around me seemed to close in, the once familiar sights now twisted and sinister. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it ghostly echoes of forgotten tales and ancient secrets. The rest of that afternoon was a blur, a chaotic whirlwind of pain and fear. I don't recall how, or how long it took, but somehow, I made it back to the footpath at the bottom of the lodge grounds adjacent to the entry road from Roundstone village. By some stroke of fate, the barman had been running errands in the village, using the lodge station wagon, and saw me stumbling along the path. He could instantly tell that something was gravely amiss and immediately stopped to help me into the vehicle. The short drive to the lodge felt like an eternity. Every bump and jolt sent fresh waves of agony through my injured foot. When we finally arrived, the barman helped me inside and into a chair in the bar. The familiar warmth and glow of the crackling fire offered a sense of safety. He promptly summoned the lodge owner and then set off to fetch a first aid kit. The lodge owner entered the bar, her eyes widening in shock as she took in the sight of my injured foot. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as a ghost. The barman reappeared with the first aid kit and quickly began to clean, disinfect, and dress my wounds with practiced precision. The lodge owner had asked me what had happened, and now, as she knelt beside me, she asked again, her voice trembling with urgency. I didn't quite know how to respond. The events of the day seemed almost too surreal to recount. The barman handed me a large glass of whiskey, which I accepted gratefully. I drank deeply, the fiery liquid burning its way down my throat, offering a momentary distraction from the pain. Taking a deep breath, I began to recite the harrowing events of the day. As I described the attack by the enormous otter, I watched the lodge owner's face intently. The color promptly returned to her face and her expression flushed with anger. "You are describing a Dobhar," she said, dismissively, her voice tinged with both irritation and fury. "A what?" I asked, my mind struggling to process the unfamiliar term. "A Dobhar," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. "A king otter," she said. "What you are describing is a myth," she continued angrily. "Such a creature does not exist. I sympathize with your dog attack, I really do. However, I don't find it amusing when foreigners come to the oldest parts of Ireland, mocking our folklore and our local myths. These stories carry meaning for us and they have cultural significance. You will understand if we do not converse again during your stay, as I believe I have had my fill of brash and disrespectful Americans. I hope your foot heals soon. Good day." With that, the lodge owner walked out of the bar, and I did not see her again. "Canadian," I muttered under my breath. "Pardon?" The barman looked up from the fire that he was staring at in a daze. "I am Canadian," I clarified. The barman did not say anything, his eyes distant and unfocused. Very much still in a daze and in shock, I hobbled my way upstairs to my room. The barman came knocking on my door a bit later asking if I was doing okay and if I needed anything. I ordered another big glass of whiskey, which the barman assured me was on the house, and when I drained the glass the barman apologized for the lodge owner's angry words with a shrug. I went to bed. The next morning the barman had summoned a doctor to the lodge, who treated and assessed my wounds further in a small room next to reception. The doctor asked me what had happened, saying that the barman had informed him of a guest who had been attacked by a dog. After the reaction of the lodge owner and the trance-like withdrawal exhibited by the barman upon my description and apparent mocking of a mythical beast, I confirmed the dog attack. The doctor concluded that the wounds were mostly superficial, and my foot should heal promptly. I continued my stay for the remaining 2 days of my prize, mostly to rest my foot. I was still attempting to process the events that had occurred. The once enchanting and beautiful Irish wilderness now seemed to hold an ominous presence, and the memory of the monstrous otter haunted my thoughts. I ordered a flatbed truck service to collect my car and take it home, with me sitting in the passenger seat opposite the truck driver. I was still not able to drive with my foot. That is my story. There is nothing else to add. I went back to Dublin, continued my job, paid my taxes and just got on with life. I hardly ever share my story, as I have done here. I had no prior knowledge of Irish myths and cryptids before my fishing trip to Roundstone Bog, deep in the Irish wild. I was oblivious to the local legends, but that did not stop me from meeting one.